It's important that we be vigilant with ourselves to make sure that we're always asking questions and being open and receptive to having our minds changed based upon new information.
These media organizations were saying the exact same sentences, and they were not written by Canadians. They were not written by investigative journalism. They were written by the master propagandists of the WHO and other global organizations.
They're afraid of the information that we've accumulated because all of them were complicit in the harming and killing of Canadians during COVID.
Everybody's putting in their money to pay for the education, and people should get to spend their part on their kids the way they want.
One person with a particular ideology is dictating who will sit as judges in our court system.
You're always under orders from your heart, from God, however you connect to the higher source. And we need to remind these authoritarians that they don't have that authority. They're not allowed to supersede God or basic fundamental rules of society. Well, hello friends. It is very good to join you again after a week off, filled in by the great Jason Christoff, who I thought did a phenomenal job. Really enjoyed watching last week's episode a couple of days later with bandages on my eye, but I could see very good with the one eye. So first of all, I'd love to thank you, Jason Christoff, for coming in and keeping things alive and sharing some great insights at what is under the underbelly of the beast. Ted, it's great to see you. Sorry, it looks like I got a shiner, but it's just a product of the surgery. I haven't been in a street fight yet, not recently.
You've been in a street fight for the last 5 years.
That's true. Yeah. I've taken some bumps and lumps, but this one is just surgical. Oh,
Well,
how are you doing, Ted?
Well, nice to have you back. You've been missed. Always lovely to do it with Jason, but you bring a nice spirit to these conversations, so you're very much appreciated. So, and your surgery, it's coming along?
Yeah, the surgery went well. It wasn't really painful. I don't remember a lot of it. I was in extremely good mood as I left, which I think had something to do with the anesthetic medications. And it's the beginning of a process, or it's the next step in a process. So yeah, hopefully I'll be regaining much better sight in my right eye. I've learned that one eye does a very good job. And Ted, actually, the whole experience of losing sight in one eye and then being in the process of going through efforts and work to gain back that sight really makes you appreciate. I've always thought, when I say my prayers, it's an easy one to say thank you for. We're going to talk about the power of thankfulness later. It's easy to say, well, thank you for the ability to see. And when you lose that ability, you realize how precious it is. So I would recommend everybody, if you're watching this show, if you can lift your eyes off the computer and look at your family or someone you love, or look out the window at a tree or a bird fly by, it's a great time to tell the Creator thank you, because it really is an amazing thing to be able to see. So, and I'm grateful. Friends have come around my side. Jerry and Anka did a lot to help out, that I could arrange the surgery that I needed, and things are coming along. So it's good to be back.
Glad to hear that, Mark. You made me think of something though, just with your comments now, is there's physical sight and then there's other sight as well. And I think that's our gratitude to our audience, is that they have different kind of sight. They see what many people don't see, and we have to be grateful. Sometimes it's difficult to see what we see, but I would rather see than not see.
That's so true, Ted. And doesn't that go back to very early in, the whole quest for truth and freedom? Jesus Christ himself talked to his apostles and said, some people have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. They don't get the meaning of things. We live in a world, as we're learning more and more. And I think Jason Christoff's comments, really illustrated that just the degree of propaganda and mind control we've been living under. And so for those of us that, are a little more resistant to mind control, mental manipulation, and are able to see what's in front of us and use logic and rational thinking and help others to piece it out, it's a very valuable thing. It really is. And you've been doing that for a long time, Ted.
Well, I think this sight comes from, sometimes it comes from hard times. And it also comes from the willingness to change one's mind about something and to recognize that something that we thought to be true is not true. Those are hard ones to do. And, I have to tell you that every day I wake up and say, what do I believe today that I'm going to find out tomorrow wasn't true? If we think that we've seen through it all, I think that that's naive. I think we're all victims of deception and manipulation, and it's important that we be vigilant with ourselves to make sure that we're always asking questions and being open and receptive to having our minds changed based upon new information.
Yeah, Ted, that is so true. In fact, I find that as we become more knowledgeable, as we learn more, we have more experience, often we become humbler about what we know. And, there's the old saying, the more the more you don't know. And I find that there's a mathematical model that really relates to that very well, because it's reasonable to imagine what we call our sphere of knowledge. So if I have a sphere, this is everything I know is this sphere of knowledge. Everything within the sphere is what I already know. Everything outside of the sphere, I have no idea. But the edge of the sphere, that's the edge of discovery. That's where I know I don't know. That's the point where I go, okay, from here, I don't know the answer to the next question. And it's interesting because in mathematics, the surface area of a sphere is proportional to the square of the radius. So that means as my depth of knowledge grows, the amount that I know I don't know increases according to the square. And so the old saying, the more you know, the more you don't know, it's a very solid old expression. And Ted, like you've said many times, I know I like to quote you on this one, as you say, don't hang on to your beliefs too tightly. And it doesn't mean we should just be wishy-washy. Oh, Pfizer says it's safe, it's safe. No, we need to think, we need to reason, we need to know what we know. But also, our understanding of the universe is constantly evolving. And there's still mysteries. I mean, even in physics, is light a particle? Is light a wave? Appears to be neither, appears to be both. So I think it's very important for us to have open minds so that together we can keep refining our knowledge and expanding our understanding of the world around us.
Well, and Mark, I had an experience of that the last week as we've done a couple of interviews now in preparation for the National Citizens Inquiry hearings that are coming up in Kelowna on March 9th to the 11th. And in those conversations, I'm realizing there's a lot about farming and food that I don't know anything about. And I've actually been quite shocked. And just to give you a little example of that, Mark, of course, we were all outraged about the culling of almost 400 ostriches in British Columbia last year. Well, it was brought to my attention that culling happens almost every week in Canada, and that the CFIA has been responsible for the culling of not thousands, not tens of thousands, but millions of animals in this country over the last number of years. And so I fully expect that the next hearings, we're going to be exposed to a lot of things that we don't know something about.
Yeah, Ted, this is very true. I've looked into this culling issue a bit, and I think what's really twisted about it, I mean, again, going in, PCRing some chickens, and then ordering the farmer to kill off, 100,000 chickens, paying the farmer from the taxpayer to destroy the food supply, in usually ways that are sick, like foaming out and drowning all the chickens. But, if you think of the level of perversion of it, is taxpayers are being taxed to pay the farmer to kill the chickens, which is decreasing the food supply for the public and at the very minimum increasing the cost of food. And ultimately, part of the very old globalist agenda of starving people. And in the last few weeks, I've been looking a bit at the history of Russia through the supposed Russian Revolution, and just how starving people is a recurrent authoritarian way to take complete control and also kill a lot of people. So I think we should be very suspicious when the government comes around, wants to swab our chickens with the same kind of technology they swabbed our noses, and then offer the chickens and the ostriches made.
Okay, we better shift onto wins. That's why
We should,
people
but I
came.
just want to highlight that March 9th to 11th is the
Thank you.
NCI hearings in Kelowna. We'll make sure we put links in this. And Ted, I was away and I didn't get a chance to comment on some of the wins of the week comments. And so I'd love to just take a few minutes
Sure.
and share a few things from last week's episode that I didn't get to be a part of except in the audience. Murray Palmer wrote something I thought was fascinating. He said, this was on the subject of transgendering of children, etc. He said, young immature minds have no idea of the dangerous powder keg with which they are playing when they consume the medically approved cocktails of drugs and hormones, blockers, that no one has done any true research into a safe and effectiveness of these psychotic brain poisons. Adding any number of recreational drugs that our government has encouraged the use of is just a recipe for disaster. Thanks for that one, Murray. Our friend Thomas Mailer wrote, I'm glad you mentioned Ted's son, Mark. That was the highlight of this week's wins for me. Ted has dedicated his life to saving other children so they don't have to get injured by vaccines like his son did. So a tribute to you, Ted, from
Thank
Thomas.
you. Thanks, Tom.
And as well, Thomas had recommended a beautiful piece of music of Gustav Mahler. And there was just a little technical issues while I was away. And I think we'll be bringing that song out probably next week. And we promised to share some photos of Thomas with giant mushrooms. And I wonder if the team can just bring up a few of those photos. Folks, you got to have a look at this. Here's Thomas and Charlene. And he's not just a great scientist and a great blues harmonica player. He's a real master of searching for wild mushrooms and recognizing them. And look at some of these amazing mushrooms. So I hope that we get out to Victoria and get to go mushroom hunting with Thomas Mailer again. Lisa Erickson last week wrote, another great episode, gentlemen. I sure do look forward to listening to you both every week. It's fantastic that Trump has pulled the USA out of all the climate policies. I'm happy for our American friends. I think we can all agree that we need to respect Mother Earth and not pollute her and care for all living beings. And a couple more. These are from 2 weeks ago, friends. Roland Marie Ross wrote, these past 6 years have been a roller coaster for so many of us. And when we see the depths of naivety, I have to stop and think, I was that way too, about the whole vaccine ritual for decades. And she also wrote about many people she knows who are now realizing that they have been lied to and poisoned. And she recalled in her comment one woman telling her, my husband died in 2023 from cancer, and I have heart trouble, and I know what it is. And Roland wrote, my heart broke for her. And like so many, we have to extend our voices, minds, and hearts to them and share these stories with compassion with others and convince them to seek the truth. Also, Virginia shared something that was new to me, and I'm looking forward to looking into this further. But she shared that vitamin C has been used to help heroin addicts kick the habit without withdrawal symptoms and to stay clean. So there's another potential benefit of vitamin C to look into. And then just skipping ahead briefly to last week's comments. First, thank you for all the prayers and well wishes for the surgery that I was going through at the time from Monica, Linnell, Thomas, Ohm, Lisa, Virginia, and Monica. And Monica noted, by the way, it's always a treat when Jason is on. I agree. Linnell commented, I'm not sure how you're able to keep fighting for so long without taking more than a toll on your life. And yeah, Linnell, you're correct. This 5 years has taken a toll, but I think God has a sense of humor. And so bizarrely, I still feel strong. And she shared some of her insights, particularly of the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of, quote, government in Canada. And Virginia roused my interest in a song called Hymns for Nations, which is apparently a song to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which she sang years ago in the Norapa chorus, directed by Bill Douglas. I'm going to pop a link. She shared a link for a Pete Seeger rendition, but I think we're looking for a choir rendition, maybe even a retake of her with the director, Bill Douglas. So anyways, folks, thank you very much for the comments. I enjoy them. Even the week I was off, I still enjoyed reading the comments and interacting. And for folks to know, we appreciate it. For those of you who can choose a paid subscription to drtrozy.news or Dr. Trozy on Substack, there's hundreds of us that actually finance this whole operation. It's very leanly spent doing this operation. We're grateful for the tens of thousands of subscribers, but those that can choose a paid subscription, you're helping us to keep this going. We appreciate donations as well. And we're going to be, Wins of the Week comes out and people watch this video on a variety of platforms. But for our paid subscribers, you get a full index of all the wins, the links to the wins, so you can check in on everything related material. It's sort of a library of wins of the week for people to use, even for your own sharing, your own publications. And actually, we're going to be looking in the near future. We want to come up with some other very special things that will be sort of special things for our paid subscribers. So thanks to all of you for being part of this experience with us and for your great comments. I enjoy the chats a lot.
Yeah, these are important conversations for me too, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we got a lot of wins as usual. This week, there's some pretty good ones out of Canada too. So shall we start in the political zone, Ted?
Yeah, it's so a good one coming out of Alberta is that the University of Alberta has finally decided to reverse its so-called gender equity and diversity policies in its hiring department. And apparently, final board approval is still needed, but the university president, Bill Flanagan, has acknowledged that the previous DEI policy fueled division. And he also said it's not the university's role to take ideological positions, but rather to create an environment that encourages dialogue, mutual respect, and the pursuit of knowledge. And so I'm encouraged to see that U of A is realizing that the DEI initiative, while it may have been well-intended, actually caused more harm than good. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, that's good to see that moving forward. I got to admit, Ted, I don't think the DEI agenda was built on any good intentions at all. And the reason I say that is, again, recently I've been looking at like late 1800, early 1900s history, the Bolshevik bloodshed of Russian people, things that happened in Germany in the early 1900s. And this isn't new, actually. This, I would just call it, from my own perspective, sexually perverting of human beings into degrading behavior. It's not new at all. It's an old way to drive humans insane.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to see Alberta taking a lead on this and stepping away from that. And imagine now getting hired at the University of Alberta, for instance, if you want to get hired as a professor of engineering, it's probably going to be based on your research and performance as an engineer. No need to wear red high heels, dress up as cross-dress or anything like that. Just show up. It's going to be based on merit. It doesn't matter your personal sexual behaviors or lack thereof. So congratulations, University of Alberta. Sane days are coming to you. Well, we got some Alberta's doing really good today. They're kicking off two of the big wins in the political, and this one comes from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. She says the province will hold a referendum this October seeking a mandate to pursue sweeping changes on immigration as it relates to Alberta, as well as changes to the Constitution. Smith said the referendum is necessary because current immigration levels are straining Alberta's healthcare, education, and infrastructure and are not suitable for her taxpayers. Other referendum questions include asking if Albertans agree to abolish the Senate. That's a musical statement. Provinces, not Ottawa, should select justices for provincial courts of the King's Bench and appeals courts. This referendum will also ask whether provinces should be permitted to opt out of federal health, education, and social service programs without losing federal funding. And of course, that federal funding comes from the provinces to begin with. Ted, what are your thoughts on these sweeping referendums in Alberta?
Well, I like that they're asking the Alberta taxpayer what their wishes are. These are pretty significant changes to life in Alberta if they're able to go ahead with these. The fact that they're asking the questions to me is significant. And what I see this is they're preparing the basis to increase their sovereignty as a province. I think that's a good thing. And again, my wish is that other provinces will take a page out of Alberta's actions here and exercise their own authority and their own sovereignty so that we can reduce the kind of, well, the word is tyranny that's happening from our federal government. So I'm encouraged to see this.
Yeah, me too, Ted. And that selecting of judges for provincial courts,
Absolutely.
that's a start. If we're going to keep those old courts at all, they've got to be cleansed of the political appointments that have been put in there.
Well, somebody said the stat that with Trudeau in power that he appointed something like 94% of the judges that are at the federal and provincial level. So you've got one person with a particular ideology that is dictating who will sit as judges in our court system. And I don't think any of us are under the illusion that those appointments were unbiased and fair. And what they've done is I think they've put us in a very difficult situation in this country of trying to climb out of an ideological nightmare when people in those positions were placed there because of their commitment to that ideology. So Alberta is trying to undo the strings, undo the restraints, and I think that's exactly what needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. If I can nitpick a bit on words, we often use the term ideology, like DEI is an ideology or politicians with certain ideology. But I think when you look at the history of the last century, it's not so much ideology. It's about the demoralization of a society. And so they're not really ideals. It's not like a different religion or a different belief system. It's an intentional vandalism of culture and intellectual capacity.
This is a good one coming out of the US. A coalition of leading medical freedom, civil liberties, and public policy organizations have launched a new national initiative called the COVID Justice Resolution. And they're calling it a landmark resolution that will represent a unified stand to examine what occurred during the COVID-19 era, repudiate the most harmful emergency policies, and establish binding principles to ensure these violations of liberty are never repeated. And the partners include the Autism Action Network, Children's Health Defense, Health Freedom Defense Fund, Stand for Health Freedom, and the Brownstone Institute. So those are all pretty important organizations. Their goal is to end the harmful COVID policies, affirm constitutional rights, especially during public health emergencies, establish guardrails on future emergency powers, to protect bodily autonomy, free speech, and religious liberty, all foundations of a free and sovereign citizen.
Well, that's a great project. And Ted, I'm going to reach out some of the people on that list or organizations that we're associated with. I really want to reach out and bring to their attention World Counts for Health recent publication regarding WHO collaboration centers. Because what we're learning is that, the country, even the US, well, you've exited the WHO, but the WHO is all through the country. And you have, approximately 100 US organizations that appear to be governmental US sovereign organizations. They're not, they're foreign WHO run.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to have to be tackled if we're going to have a resolution so this sort of nonsense never happens again. Glad to see that going on. Well, this is interesting from Alberta, a message from the Alberta Parents Union. So this is interesting. There's two unions involved here. One is the Parents Union, and the other one is the Teachers Union. And if you've been following the story of the last few years, you'll see, how compromised teachers unions are. So here's a message from the Alberta Parents Union. Last year, the Alberta Teachers Union launched a petition to try to get a referendum that would end funding for accredited independent schools. Last week, that effort fell short, thanks God. The citizen initiative petition needed 177,732 verified signatures by the February 11th deadline in order to secure a petition, and just over 126,000 were submitted. So while we commend, and again, this is the Parents Union saying, while we commend Alberta's participation in the democratic process in general, the failure of this particular petition effort is good news for parents across Alberta. For years, families have relied on Alberta's diverse educational system, public, separate, charter, independent, and home education, to meet the unique learning needs of their children. Many families make significant financial sacrifices to accept these options. This petition wasn't about helping public schools. It was about eliminating choice. So that's what the Alberta Teachers Union was trying to petition, was to eliminate the choice. While the petition ultimately did not succeed, the fact that it gathered more than 100,000 signatories shows that there is an organized movement that wants to restrict parental choice and centralize education under a single model, and is willing to mislead parents to achieve its aims. If you believe parents, not bureaucracy, should be in the driver's seat when it comes to their children's education, we invite you to stand with us, and you can stand with them. You can tap into this by going to albertaparentsunion.ca. Ted, what are your thoughts on this two forces, the teachers union petitioning to eliminate options and the parents union pushing to keep them.
Well, again, I think that this shows that our children are not safe in schools because those that we think are acting in our children's best interest and would support the authority and the responsibility of parents are actually involved in undermining parental responsibility and parental choice. It would be very curious to me, Mark, of those 100,000 signatures, how many of those were legitimate parents and how many of them were teachers who have a bias towards the movement of independent schools in Alberta. I think that's one of the things that makes Alberta strong is that they have educational options for families, public, separate, charter, independent, and home education. And what I see the teachers union was trying to do is narrow the amount of choices that family would have. And so I see this as exposing who teachers are, and unfortunately, it's not it doesn't look favorably for them.
Yeah, it's sad to see that. And although these administrative bodies are mostly hijacked, and you have all these organizations dancing to the same drum of their union rather than thinking about the future of the country. And Ted, this is such an important issue. When the communist operatives and the communist movement, which is really a dictatorial movement to rob everything and turn the planet into sort of a slave colony, demoralization is the first step. And even going back to the Soviet Union, before literally the Russian people were liberated from that takeover of their region of the world, one of the reasons they said that the demoralization part of the process takes 15 to 20 years is provided you can adequately infiltrate the educational system, it gives you time to completely release fully programmed people. So, you get them at 5 years old, and by the time they're 20, if you own that educational system, and I think that's one of the big reasons or I think that's the central reason that they don't want people to have choices.
Absolutely.
But everybody's putting in their money to pay for the education, and people should get to spend their part on their kids the way they want. I completely support the Alberta Parents Union, and I recommend others do the same.
Absolutely.
Well, we've got something interesting in medicine health. It looks like famous scientists of the Truth and Freedom movement are recognizing how much the Canadian National Citizens Inquiry has to offer. What can you tell us about what happened last week in that way, Ted?
I was tickled to see this. Dr. Byron Bridle introduced me to Dr. Harvey Risch. Dr. Risch was appointed by President Donald Trump to be the chair of the President's Cancer Panel back in November of 2025. And so this week, Dr. Risch reached out and he asked if I could help identify for him the testimony that was delivered at the National Citizens Inquiry since 2023 that would have some implications for the kind of response to cancer during the COVID-19 pandemic that they might want to consider in their efforts. And so it was delightful to see that somebody of the profile of Dr. Risch, who's chair of the President's Cancer Panel, would recognize the contribution that the NCI could make to that conversation. And so my gratitude to Dr. Byron Bridle for the introduction and to Dr. Risch for giving us the opportunity to contribute, which we did.
Yeah. And if there's any legitimately left in the haunted halls of, the Corporation of Canada, this should be a real, wake-up call, because Canadian citizens put together the most organized, under oath testimony of experts and people's personal testimonies in the world on COVID-19. And now you have the scientist appointed by the President of the United States reaching out to the NCI to get evidence, to take advantage of the work of the Canadian people so the Americans don't get poisoned and abused again, and yet not a peep about it in the haunted halls of the Canadian Parliament, or as far as I'm aware of any of the provinces. And I know that's largely because all our best politicians were thrown out of the government as it was taken over by the WEF. And I think of people like Derek Splone and Randy Hillier. But it's at least a very strong sign for what's going on the north side of that 49th parallel, which is completely illegitimate.
Well, and you've identified it as it's, lovely to be acknowledged by the United States government and in terms of what the contribution the NCI can make. And it's such a contrast to the absolute silence that comes out of our federal government, our provincial governments here in Canada. who won't even acknowledge that the NCI exists, much less benefit from the testimony and from the commissioner's reports and recommendations that they've put together. Not one politician of any political party has stood up in the legislature and acknowledged the NCI. What that tells me, Mark, is they're afraid of the information that we've accumulated, because they were actually, all of them were complicit in the harming and killing of Canadians during COVID.
Yes, completely true. Well, may the NCI stand strong, folks. If you're in BC next month, March 9th to 11th, is your chance to go to Kelowna and get involved. Well, that brings us to some legal wins. And one, of course, is involving one of the most famous Canadians, Adam Skelly of the Adamson Barbecue. One man, a small restaurant in Etobicoke, which is outside of Toronto, and a show of defiance that lit a spark of hope in the face of the suffocating governmental overreach in 2020. And that, of course, is Adam Skelly. Now, 6 years later, now, folks, we posted, we put a post up a week ago. We'll put a reminder to it. But look at the Adamson case and the video there, and you see a man who said, "I'm going to keep serving sandwiches and salad and soup to people," when the liquor stores and pot shops were open, when politicians were caught off camera with no masks on, laughing at the public before they lied to us. This man said, "No, I'm going to keep my restaurant open. The government has no right to tell me I'm not allowed to earn a living or provide a service to my customers." And the crackdown was so intimidating. They literally brought in men on horses. Like, who ships horses to a restaurant in Etobicoke to put a show on the parking lot? That's what it was. It was like a multi-$100,000 show. Now it's a multi-million-dollar court case.
Yeah.
But the great thing is Adam Skelly, with a lot of people helping him, is standing against us. Chris Weisdorf and others really deserve a lot of credit. Anyways, as you all know, last week was the next big step in court. His fight against COVID tyranny is entering its most important chapter. So Adam reopened his restaurant in protest of the Ontario harsh lockdowns order. Police arrested him. Public health seized his property. And yet he never backed down. And now Adam is before what they call the Ontario Superior Court to have the court examine whether the Reopening Act trampled on Canadians' charters rights, which I think it certainly did. The same officials who claimed to protect public health refused to show the evidence behind restaurant closures, hid meetings under NDAs, and even used police to enforce their mandates. Adam defiantly states the government isn't some untouchable monolith. It's made up of people who can and should be held accountable. And if we stand firm and insist on transparency, the truth will come out. That's a quote from Adam Skelly himself. The website is the bbqtrial.com. Fascinating case. Ted, you're quite familiar with this situation as well. What are your thoughts for this? I think this is the last stand of anyone in the old, somewhat mockery of a justice system called the Canadian courts against the abuse of the Canadian public in 2020.
Well, there's a few outstanding court cases yet to be heard. I know that Lee Turner has 3 or 4. Rocco Galati has some. Kip Warner has one. Tanya. So there's a few still waiting to be heard, but this was a very important one because Adam Skelly stood up against all kind of tyranny to shut him down and refused to buckle. I'm hanging out with Vincent Gershes this week, and he listened to all 3 days of testimony, and he said it was an embarrassment. The government failed to provide any evidence to justify the shutting down of businesses. They had no scientific evidence. He just said, if Adam Skelly doesn't win this thing hands down, we really have a problem. So looking forward to hearing how that goes. Maybe by next week, we'll have something more that we can report on this Adam Skelly case.
Ted, I'm kind of surprised that the perpetrators of these crimes against Canadians aren't so drunk on power that they didn't just come right out and say it. Say, we've got plenty of justifications: centralization of wealth, intimidation of the public, stealing of assets, and forcing people into a deadly injection campaign. I mean, they should have just said it. That was plenty of justification from, a authoritarian point of view.
Yeah.
What do we got from the Liberty Council?
Well, this is a situation in the United States. There's a school in Fort Bragg, which is where military have their children go to school. And there was a demand letter that was sent by Liberty Counsel to the Department of Defense Education on behalf of parents at Fort Bragg whose kindergarten and pre-kindergarten children have been subjected to sexually inappropriate and disturbing behavior from a male teacher. And so multiple families have reported that school administrators have allowed a transgender identified male teacher to dress provocatively as a female, wear a dog collar with various tags, wear an animal tail to class. He tells the students about how he turns into a wolf and describes his sexual fantasies as an animal. He makes statements about being born in a male's body, but he's actually a woman, and on and on. Anyways, Liberty Counsel sent a letter demanding that the Department of Education immediately suspend the teacher. What I can tell you is that as of February the 19th, Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth announced that they have severed employment with the individual and he will no longer have access to Fort Bragg or its children. So nice to see some very immediate action as a result of that complaint.
Yeah. Geez, doesn't it sound like that fellow who thinks he's a sexy wolf, etc. Like that person really needs psychiatric care, like good old fashioned psychiatric care, as in like we need to talk, like lay down on the couch, buddy. Where did this start?
Yeah.
Well, there's been a new superhero for me in North America has been the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton. I mean, he's just been hitting one ball after another out of the park. Anyways, he filed a lawsuit against Children's Health System of Texas. So imagine the Texas Attorney General. This is what it looks like when the battle is happening right there in the government, instead of in Canada where like the government's almost fully occupied by the enemy. But anyways, so Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a lawsuit against Children's Health System of Texas. They're the country's 7th largest pediatric hospital. Also filed it against Jason Jerin, a Dallas area pediatric doctor, accusing them of providing illegal transition procedures in violation of Texas law. And Ken Paxton stated this criminal extremist not only permanently harmed children, but he also then defrauded Medicaid and stuck Texas taxpayers with the bill for this insanity. Experimental transition procedures on minors are illegal, unethical, and will not be tolerated in Texas. Hallelujah. Ted, isn't that wonderful?
Well, it is. And talk about a contrast to what happened this week in British Columbia, where the BC Human Rights Tribunal assigned a penalty of $750,000 to former school trustee Barry Neufeld for declaring that there's only two sexes, male and female. So we've got an attorney general in the United States who's filing a lawsuit against a hospital that's harming kids. And we've got a tribunal here in British Columbia, a human rights tribunal, that takes the side of those that are pushing this harm to our kids and fines him $750,000. I don't know that you could get any more extreme than that.
Yeah. And it was very recently another story involving Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. I believe he intervened in the equivalent of their medical colleges, like the colleges that have used Dr. Hoff and Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. Trozy and Dr. Clay and all that. In the case of Mary Tyler Bowden, that he stepped in and said, no. This is not happening. It's illegal for you to abuse a doctor over her not only free but accurate speech and advice. So I would say everybody send out your, however you do it, your Christian, Muslim, Buddhist prayers to Ken Paxton. God bless him for what he's doing in Texas.
Nice to see. Mark, this is a great win that happened in the UK. The University College of London has agreed to pay £21 million to settle a lawsuit brought by 6,500 former students who claimed their education was gutted by COVID-19 policies, canceled lectures, substandard Zoom teachings, locked libraries, locked labs. Now, what's interesting is that this is only the first of many court cases that will be brought by former students. Apparently, there's another 36 other cases against UK universities on behalf of 194,000 claimants. If successful, there could be hundreds of millions of pounds and compensation to these students. Boy, that should have these universities who really defrauded students of their paid tuition and gave them a substandard education. It should have them nervous in the UK, but the hope is that this also lights a fire of lawsuits in the United States and Canada, and these universities are held to account for, just being absolute puppets in the COVID tyranny that we saw over the last 5 years.
Ted, I sure agree with you, and I'm sure glad to see this, as a parent of university students myself. I mean, you just kind of summarize what happened. I mean, for instance, you have a student who's already invested multiple years of their life, tens of thousands of dollars, thousands of hours, pursuing a career, pursuing an education. And then one day the university says, there's no classes, but we're keeping your tuition. And then they say, well, there's no labs, there's no pools, there's going to be online learning. And then at some point, they say, oh, we're opening the classes again, but only if you take this genetic toxic bioweapon that we don't have any idea what we're talking about, or we're truly trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
And so I think the liability of these universities, I have to admit, I've always been a fan of education in universities, but in the last few years, I started to think that it's a dangerous thing to send your kid to university.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed by my universities. I was at the University of British Columbia, and when I see how they treated Dr. Frances Widdowson when she was there trying to share some truth with students, I wanted to shred my UBC diploma or master's degree and tell them I no longer want to be associated with them.
I said I felt the same way when my University of Western Ontario fired their ethics professor, Julie Ponesse, because she had some issue with the ethics of the abuse of students and forced injections. So, yeah, it's a great time in terms of, we're getting a chance to really weed out the garbage and discover the real champions. So we know who, for instance, who is our real ethics professor in Canada?
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Dr. Ponesse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do we got? Something going on with Kaylin Ford. What's going on
Yeah,
with
well, she
Kaylin
was
Ford?
a candidate, actually described as a star candidate for the United Conservative Party in Alberta in March of 2019 for the Alberta election that year. She's filed a defamation lawsuit against those who actively attempted to discredit her in a classic case of cancel culture. She was viciously attacked online, and as a result of that, dropped out of the election and has experienced, significant reputational harm. In 2023, a judge ruled that the anonymous source who sparked the mobs was untrustworthy, with motives based on jealousy and spite. And subsequently, Ford launched a lawsuit against the people and the media outlets that she said defamed her. And when the claims are all added up, Ford is seeking $7.65 million. They say that she's already had some success with some of the defendants having settled out of court. One defendant has been compelled to pay much of her legal costs, but the full trial is set to begin in a couple of weeks, or next week, actually, March the 2nd, and expected to take 70 days. It's taken nearly 7 years for Ford to get her day in court. And if the court rules in her favor, it will set a precedent that could put a heavy chill on future cancel culture efforts. We can only hope.
Yeah, I sure hope so. That is not the way we want society to be steered by basically a bunch of gossip and emotional manipulation of people who don't take the time to look at the facts. Luckily, that's not our crowd. Well, this is a great one, folks. You may recall it's been some months ago since the Ontario gentleman Jeremy McDonald woke up after someone had broken into his house. 3 men had broken into his house. One was in his room with a crossbow, looting his house. And this fellow got out of bed in the middle of the night and defended his home and defended himself and his family against clearly a violent criminal who was armed with a deadly weapon in his room. The thing that shocked us, well, two things shocked us. One was how cool Jeremy McDonald was, because he actually gave the guy a good licking. And by the time the cops arrived, that other fellow needed to go to the hospital, which was great. In my opinion, I believe in self-defense. But the weird thing was that Jeremy McDonald was dragged off with handcuffs
Yeah.
And the prosecutor was asking for a stronger prosecution of him than the guy that broke into his house with weapons. So, anyways, here's the great news, folks. And I mean, I'm glad to hear this happen in Ontario because I'm always surprised when anything sane happens in Ontario in those little places where they dress up like they're on a boat with robes and funny suits. That's my thoughts on the courts, having visited myself. But, anyways, the charges against Jeremy McDonald have been dropped. He was facing aggravated assault charges for defending himself against the alleged crossbow wielding home invader. And as I mentioned, he woke to every homeowner's worst nightmare. A violent career criminal broke into his house while his family was asleep. Jamie did what any responsible father would do, who's also a ninja, and he defended his home. But instead of protecting the victim, the police charged Jeremy with aggravated assault and other offenses. The intruder, who's a known criminal, walked away. Well, he crawled away. He walked away from the hospital later, I think. I don't think he walked away right away. I feel safer because Jeremy McDonald at least gave one guy a tune-up. The Crown now admits there's no reasonable prospect of conviction under self-defense laws. Thank God.
Yeah.
It's a win for common sense that came with hefty legal costs and arguably took a lot longer than it should have.
Well,
McDonald didn't ask for this battle, but thanks to public pressure and support, sanity has prevailed. We've got to get some pictures of Jeremy McDonald. If he doesn't already look like The Rock, we're going to airbrush him and make him look like The Rock. Jeremy McDonald, we love you. You're one of my heroes. What are your thoughts, Ted? Did you think
well,
anything sane could happen in Ontario?
well, I'm delighted to see this, but it only means that they were insane before. They should never have charged this man in the first place. And so for them to finally come to the realization that there was no reasonable prospect of a conviction under self-defense laws, it's just disappointing. It took them this long to figure it out and put this man through the kind of, I want to just say, emotional trauma of wondering whether he's dealing with a legitimate court of law or whether he's dealing with a bunch of bandits. Somehow, some way, some sanity came to the Crown, and for that we're grateful. And let's hope that they have figured out what's law-abiding in this country and what's not.
Yeah. I gotta admit, I'm a little concerned though, also to find out that serial criminal who climbed in through a girl's bedroom into a man's house with weapons and friends to loot the house, that he just walked away, like after he recovered from his injuries. I'm glad at least Jeremy McDonald gave him a little something to think about.
And there was another win this week with Pastor Derek Reimer. He had his allegations of breaching his terms, of house arrest dismissed by the courts. This is the Calgary pastor that, had a conversation with a Calgary Public Library manager, Shannon Slater, who brought in, a transgender dude to read to our children. And, Pastor Reimer simply expressed his disagreement with what she was doing. The police, again, in their misguided efforts, found that he was guilty and he was under 24/7 house arrest. And part of his conditions was that he was court ordered to provide an apology to this library manager. And he refused to do so. He said, I've got nothing to apologize for. The other thing that he was being held to account for is that he stopped on his way out of court when he was there defending himself and had a 3-minute interview with Rebel News. And they said that violated his responsibility to go straight from the courthouse back to his home. And by stopping at within the courthouse, stopping briefly to have a conversation with Rebel News was a violation. Seems like the Crown again figured out that they were on the wrong side of things and they dropped these alleged breaches. But again, I want to just say too little, too late. If anything, they ought to be issuing a formal apology to Pastor Derek Reimer, and I think he ought to be compensated for what he's gone through by Alberta Crown.
Yeah. I'd like to just tip that with a little extra respect for Pastor Reimer and all of our religious leaders who were unfortunately as rare as great nurses, great doctors, great scientists, but the religious leaders in this country who, when given a set of orders that went against everything moral and everything right and everything loving, that they said, actually, I'm under orders from God and nothing's going to trip that. And I think more of us need to take that example.
Absolutely.
especially the further we see the legalese system, which is essentially, I think, basically a satanic effort to undo the laws that the real laws, act in honor, do no harm. And I think a lot of us should take courage from people like Pastor Reimer. And remember, you're always under orders from your heart, from God, however you connect to the higher source. And we need to remind these authoritarians that they don't have that authority. They're not allowed to supersede God or basic fundamental rules of society.
Yeah.
Well, we got some wins in the citizen action department. This first one, the wealth management giant. I'd probably come up with a different phrase for Goldman Sachs than the wealth management giant. But anyways, let's be nice to them today because they're backing away from one of the cliffs. The wealth management giant, Goldman Sachs, plans to abandon diversity criteria for board membership, representing one of the biggest departures yet from the so-called wokening of corporate America. The Wall Street Journal reports that Goldman has quietly agreed to a request from the National Legal and Policy Center to drop other demographics, which include race, gender identity, ethnicity, and sexual orientation from its criteria for selecting candidates for its board's governance committees. The plans are expected to be officially finalized sometime this month. Political and customer backlashes to such activism has translated to business woes for companies such as, listen to the list of companies that were doing this DEI nonsense. And it was public backlash. It was people like you and I shouting about it. Disney, Bud Light, Amazon, Walmart, Target, McDonald's, Jack Daniels, Tractor Supply, Lowe's, Toyotas, Coors, and now Goldman Sachs responding to public pressure to stop being insane.
It is insane. And like you said, so they've stepped away from the edge of the cliff. I can't figure out why they put themselves on the edge of the cliff in the first place, but I think we need a meme that shows a cliff and having these guys stepping back. We need to expose them for who they are, but it just speaks to the insanity that we've been subjected to over these last 5 years, Mark.
Yeah.
And longer.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine. I mean, let's say I was hiring for a clinic in a sane state, kind of state that seeks out good doctors, or country, somewhere like Argentina or Slovakia or El Salvador, etc., Florida. I can't imagine hiring on something stupid and superficial, like saying, okay, well, we want all our nurses to have blonde hair, or we want our nurses to have blue eyes, or we want nurses that wear red shirts. I mean, that just makes no sense. I want nurses that are qualified, are scientifically sound, that have clinical experience, that have demonstrated ethical integrity, that have good personality skills, good repertoire. I mean, just stuff it's obvious. If you're hiring an airplane pilot, you want someone that can fly planes. And to start making decisions based on, well, what kind of sex do you like? That's insane.
Mark, I like this next one. It's from the Free Now Foundation, and they tell the story of Julie Threet. And what they say is Julie was not always an activist. She began as a volunteer patient ambassador for her local hospital in California. She helped out on the trauma and ICU wards, assisting nurses, comforting families, and supporting patients who often had no one else. She'd begun volunteering in 2015 and over time had taken on additional roles, staffing the gift shop, organizing large-scale hospital events, and eventually serving on the hospital's volunteer services board of directors. She was trusted, embedded, and known. But when she was severely harmed by the COVID injection, which was required for her to continue her volunteerism, she began to question the system she was a part of. When Julie did not comply with the booster requirement on volunteers in January of 2022, after years of unpaid service, she was abruptly dismissed. Beginning in 2022, Julie became a consistent presence at North California Boards of Supervisor meetings, offering verbal public comment focused on vaccine safety, institutional accountability, and patient rights. She has delivered more than 60 formal public comments across the counties, including 51 appearances before the Butte County Board of Supervisors alone, returning month after month to ensure her testimony is entered into the public record. She has traveled to more than 33 additional counties to ensure her testimony is part of the public record. Her written submissions number in the hundreds. What began as a personal injury disclosure evolved into sustained civic engagement. She continues to serve as a patient ambassador, albeit without the support of the very hospital she offered her services to for so many years. Quite the story, Mark.
Yeah, you gotta love Julie Threet. And there's a lot of things in this story. One is just how valuable someone like Julie Threet is. And the other is it's a reminder, because for instance, when we look at Canada, we often feel like, hey, looks like Alberta is like a little better province with more hope for freedom and truth. You could argue maybe Saskatchewan's going to beat him to the punchline in reality. But when we look south of the border and we see beautiful things like what's happening with Ken Paxton in Texas, what's happening with DeSantis and Dr. Ladapo in Florida, and a lot of good things, we have to remember, like, the US has its intellectual armpit also, which is California. And I find I often have to just summarize the case. A woman commits years of her life, super dedicated, completely voluntarily to a hospital. They tell her to take a supposed vaccine, turns out to be a genetic experiment or a biological weapon. It hurts her like it did everybody. The evidence is so clear now. It had negative efficacy. It didn't cure COVID. It was toxic as hell, killed more people. And she wasn't even trying to sue them for poisoning her. She was just saying, I can't do another one of those. And they just kicked her out. It just reminds you that you can go to medical school or become the administrator of a hospital and still be a complete idiot or extremely evil, one of the two. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just idiots, but God bless Julie Threet. And I hope that she can help liberate California like others have done in a few other states.
Yeah, beautiful example of taking adversity and turning it into a gift of service to her community.
Yeah, truly. Well, this brings us to the next section of Lynn's, Ted's favorite, truth bombs, telling it like it is. First one comes from one of our common top scorers, LifeSite News, founded by my wonderful friend Steve Jelsovic. What a great thing he started with decades of commitment of his life. So in an article this week in LifeSite News, they wrote this: one thing can be said for certain when it comes to legacy news coverage in Canada. The truth is, it mostly parrots the same mainstream narrative and seldom holds the government accountable, only going after conservative politicians, it seems, who don't uphold a woke agenda. Here in Canada, if you were to tune into CBC News, CTV News, any Toronto area news publication, or any other mainstream news channel on TV, radio, or online, you see a pattern emerge. The pattern is simply that the networks are always sucking up to the current Liberal government. Indeed, one of Carney's ministers, Heritage Minister Mark Miller, just claimed that independent outlets are somehow illegitimate media and should be avoided to promote social cohesion in Canada. Think about that, social cohesion through media, meaning propaganda, only one story. Anyways, when there is a lack of support for a public broadcaster, I think that contributes to the spread of disinformation, and social cohesion is therefore, we're going to have to tear this one apart, but I'll try to get to the end of it before I split my sides laughing. I think Mark the propagandist heritage minister says, I think that contributes to the spread of disinformation, and social cohesion is therefore affected. It's not about any sort of command and control of the media system you might see in other countries. It sure is. It's just on steroids here in Canada. Anyways, conservative MP Rachel Thomas countered Miller by reminding him that the role of media is not to have the back of the prime minister and be able to tell the story the government wants told. The role of media is to be truthful. And I would argue that's exactly what most of the alternative media is trying to do. Ted, what are your thoughts on Heritage Minister's claims here?
Well, what do you expect? He's part of the Liberal government, and he's probably given his speaking lines so that he doesn't spread any disinformation. And I think he spoke his lines very well that he was handed. This whole thing is a truth bomb, just revealing the kind of sad situation in our so-called legacy media, which shouldn't be called legacy media. It should be called line media. So there's line media and there's truth media. And I think that's probably a better way to describe the options that we have available in Canada today.
Yeah. And, to bring it to probably the subject closest to my heart of the last 5 years was the deception, poisoning of the population through the COVID operation.
Yeah.
And these media organizations were saying the exact same sentences, and they were not written by Canadians. They were not written by investigative journalism. They were written by the master propagandists of the WHO and other global organizations. I think Heritage Minister Mark Miller, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should get on your knees and pray God for forgiveness and find a new path and stop this nonsense. And meanwhile, maybe Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, you've impressed me so much. Maybe you should run for the People's Party of Canada.
There we go. Mark, this next one is also from LifeSite News, and they're writing about something different. They said, we used to understand that there was something disturbing about belligerent men in dresses, and there isn't enough LGBT propaganda in the world to program the average person into seeing a photograph of Robert Dorgan, the man who shot his family at a hockey rink in the United States, and not instantly register that he is a he. Instead, we are being demanded to believe LGBT propaganda over our own eyes and to override the instincts that tell us that there is something wrong with that picture. Dorgan's aggression and rage are instead attributed to transphobia. In fact, Dorgan himself stated before he started killing that opposition to transgender ideology might make him snap and do something violent. After all, he would have seen endless LGBT activist rhetoric emphasizing that any refusal to identify him as a woman constituted an act of violence. He was enabled, radicalized, and explosive. Then he exploded. He wasn't a woman. He was a deeply disturbed man. Not so long ago, society would have told him that. Wow, that's a pretty strong message.
Yeah. And I think honest people, we would tell him that as well if he were alive today. Well, we got something from Dallas Brody, quickly becoming, I don't know, probably one of my most favorite sitting people in the old political
Yeah.
orders of Canada. So the one BC party leader, Dallas Brody, was critical of the BC Human Rights Tribunal ruling regarding former school trustee Barry Neufeld. Brody called for the quasi-judicial human rights body to be abolished. Good idea. She described it as a, quote, left-wing political enforcement arm for the current provincial NDP government. They punish brave people like Mr. Neufeld for standing against gender theory being pushed by the government. BC needs more radically normal people like Barry Neufeld. I want to be a radically normal person. That's great. Vancouver nurse Amy Ham, who was fined last year by the BC College of Nurses and Midwives for saying there were only two genders, has also spoken out on Neufeld's case. And she said this, here's the thing. If my most detested enemy was fined $750,000 for their speech, I would not celebrate. She wrote, no person of sound moral principles without a hate-filled soul would gloat about the state punishing someone in this fashion. Barry Neufeld's punishment harms all of us.
Yeah. I love that line there that BC needs more radically normal people like Barry Neufeld.
Yeah, let's be radically normal. It's like conservatism is the new radical.
Mark, this next one I thought was an interesting one. They say that newly declassified CIA files allegedly outline a disturbing plan to influence Americans' minds through covert drugging using vaccines. The document states, it is believed that specific research should be undertaken to develop new chemicals or drugs that would have either an agitating effect, as in producing anxiety, nervousness, or tension, or a depressing effect that is creating a feeling of despondency, hopelessness, and lethargy. This study should include chemicals or drugs that can effectively be concealed in common items as food, water, Coca-Cola, beer, liquor, cigarettes, etc. This type of drug should also be capable of use in standard medical treatments such as vaccinations. Wow.
Yeah, this was material from the 1950s. If I'm recovering correctly, it had a strange name, Project Avocado, I think.
Yes.
And folks, you can actually go and get the original documents. Just you can go online. It was, I think Tulsi Gabbard was involved in releasing this. And this was considered to be sort of the predecessor to the MK Ultra program. And yeah, it's just, you'll look at this stuff and I mean, this isn't us making it up. This is their own white papers. These are
Yeah.
government documents from the 50s. It's 70 years since then, folks. And guess what? We've had vaccines that do a lot more than just make you feel depressed and despondent. So we should
Yep.
take this very seriously.
Yeah.
Ted, I came across one this week, and actually it was interesting. I shared it on X, and not a lot of people looked at it, which surprised me because usually we get pretty good traffic. But I still want people to have a look at this. This is we're just gonna play this one if you guys don't mind. This is just recently a man in Toronto in the Toronto City Council chambers, and what you're going to hear is the tail end of the destruction of Western society, guilt rhetoric, acknowledgments of anything but our own society, followed by this Toronto man's acknowledgement of the taxpayers, the guys paying all the. Can we just play that clip right here?
Of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent.
Okay, I'd like to start my deputation in a good way by acknowledging the people who fund this municipal enterprise, the Toronto taxpayer. Let's reflect and remember that every word spoken in this chamber, every light bulb, and every salary paid, including those of city councillors, is funded almost entirely by the hard work and earnings of taxpayers and property owners. Nearly all of the city's $18.9 billion budget comes directly from them. We acknowledge that while taxpayers and property owners have endured an almost 20% increase in the last 3 years, only a small and insulated group decides how much of their income is expropriated to sustain a burgeoning municipal bureaucracy that continues to grow regardless of outcomes and results. We pay respect to those taxpayers because without them, this institution could not indulge in ideological excesses like renaming streets and public squares, painting roads with inferior and environmentally damaging red paint, nor fund harm reduction programs that result in a steady stream of drug paraphernalia littering our streets, sidewalks, parks, and playgrounds. In this spirit of acknowledgement and with an eye to the future, we recognize the Toronto taxpayer and revere their tolerance for being taxed.
This was a good one, and it was such a contrast between with the with the land acknowledgement that was by the city council person, and then this Toronto man who really just says, "Listen, all of your salaries, everything that happens here is because of the taxpayer, and it's time that we acknowledge that." So.
Yeah. And I love the way he goes on like about how they take that $18 million budget and spend it on ridiculous. Again, we were calling ideological. I think it's just demoralization activities.
Mark, this last one is from Aaron Siri. He's the lawyer that has been involved in a number of vaccine-related court cases. And 8 years ago, he deposed Dr. Stanley Plotkins, who's considered to be the godfather of vaccination, in an action that was intended to enforce a child to be vaccinated against the wishes of the mother. Siri did a fabulous job of really exposing the deception and the ideology of the vaccine cartel, who Plotkin is considered to be kind of the head of that. Anyways, just recently, Plotkin contacted Siri with a letter. And in the letter, he said, I, meaning Stanley Plotkin, will be credited for protecting millions of children. And you, Mr. Suri, will be responsible for dead and sick unvaccinated children. This probably is Plotkin's response to Suri's recently released book that is called Vaccine Amen, where he exposes Plotkin's failure to support his claim of vaccine safety. Anyways, Suri just wrote a scathing response to Plotkin. And he said, listen, I gave you lots of chance to provide evidence to support your position. You weren't able to do that, but if you want to do a redo of the deposition, I'm glad to do it with you again. And of course, Plotkin has never responded to those overtures, but it's just pretty interesting that Plotkin, who's I think in his like 88 or something, has the lack of humility to say that he's going to remember for protecting millions of children, and Siri's going to be responsible for dead and sick unvaccinated kids. That's not what the evidence says.
No, it sure doesn't. And folks, if you haven't seen it, I'll look for some links, but you can find it yourself. Look for the famous deposition of Stanley Plotkin, the godfather of vaccination. And the stuff he admits in there, like he's just admitting it like, oh, doesn't everybody eat babies? I mean, this is not unusual, is it? Like the stuff he admits. I mean, it's anybody who sees that deposition realizing that this guy's the leader of the science would, I think, immediately, if they have any logic, if they have eyes that can see, ears that can hear, they would immediately not let another needle in a kid right
Absolutely.
then and there. And I think what this demonstrates, just like with the Canadian government or pseudo government, whatever you want to call it, it's a recurrent theme. Stanley Plotkin's faith and belief is in the fact that he believes that enough Americans are adequately gaslit and blinded by propaganda that they'll actually think he saved lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aaron Siri is a believer in facts and a believer in science and a believer in openness and transparency. And Aaron Siri is gambling on the idea that the facts will rule in the end and people will realize what a wonderful
Absolutely.
job he's done.
Absolutely.
And as we know from a recent survey, 52% of Americans, that's more than half, with all the COVID propaganda, have now crossed the line in the terms that they go, yeah, I believe those COVID shots were toxic and killed people and are hurting people. So don't feel alone, folks, because we're not alone anymore. We are the majority. And the
Absolutely.
reason we're the majority, because as Robert Malone said, the truth is a lion. It will achieve what it needs to achieve. So big salute out to Aaron Siri and Stanley Plotkin. You're getting pretty old, man. You better get down on your knees and choose repentance while you can, because
That's right.
you're running out of time, buddy.
Mark, I'm going to have to let you finish up here. I'm being called away here, so you're in charge. Good to see
All
you.
right, Ted.
Look forward to
We
seeing you
will
next
miss
week.
you, sir. Take very good care.
Blessings.
All right, friends. Well, it's just you and me for the wrap up here. And I want to share a few words of wisdom and have a little chat. So, first words of wisdom are from Valery Legasov, Chernobyl, 2019. And it says this. He said, when the truth offends, we lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid. Ted has shared something, a call to action, and this is regarding petition E7025, which is a petition to prevent floor crossing. I think recently we've seen a lot of conservative MPs in the federal fiasco, some still call it a government, crossing the floor and joining the Liberals, I guess, to be on the winning team, even though the winning team is sinking the ship on which we all ride. So, anyways, this petition is sponsored by Conservative MP Leon Rude, and it's open to sign until April 17th. This is in response to Conservative MP Matt Genereux crossing the floor to join the Liberals. He's the most recent one. And this petition states, in Canada's parliamentary system, MPs are elected to represent their constituents under a party banner, but unrestricted floor crossing can erode voter trust amid rising political corruption and scandals. We, the undersigned citizens and residents of Canada, call upon the House of Commons to amend the Parliament of Canada Act to require that any member of Parliament who crosses the floor to join another registered political party must vacate their seat and trigger a by-election in their riding, while permitting them to sit as an independent without such a requirement. And the petition has already received 45,000 signatures. And folks, you can find that at www.ourcommons.ca/petitions and etc. From there, you should be able to find that petition E7025. Friends, forgive me that Ted had to go early today. As you know, he's a man on a mission and a lot of missions at the same time. And I would have loved to have him with me to talk about this, but I just want to share wise words and a nice outro song. And these wise words come from somebody you've never heard of, somebody who I held very dear, someone who in the town of Harrow, Ontario, where I lived for many years, many people held dear. This is Ann Miller. Ann Miller passed away in 2018 at the age of 82. And she ran a little shop that did license renewals for cars and sold pens and pencils. It was a little tiny shop, but every time I would go in there to renew my license or whatever, I looked forward to it so much because this was truly an enlightened, beautiful, spiritual woman. And one day she said this to me. She said, when I pray now, Mark, I don't ask for anything. I just start thanking God, and that engages the whole process. And that's something that stuck with me all these years. And especially recently, as I've been looking at some of the history of the last century or last 150 years, and there's a recurrent theme, which is the authoritarians, communists by a large variety of names. They change the name a lot, but the underlying theme is uh, authoritarianism and a regime where ultimately all the assets are stolen and all the control is stolen and the people are reduced to slaves, like happened in the Soviet Union and other places, like's happening in Canada right now. And one thing that they oppose is religion. And it's not just because of all the nonsense that you can find in organized religion. I think it's because they do not want you and I having a spiritually live, healthy soul. They do not want us connecting with God. And I think that's exactly why we should make an extra point to do so. And I think that Anne's advice of practicing thankfulness, and of course, this makes a lot of spiritual sense, but even in psychological terms, the practice of thankfulness is, I believe, the most powerful psychological habit you can do to increase your level of happiness and satisfaction in life. And it's not hard. If you ever think, well, what do I got to be thankful for? Well, just stop for a moment. What do I have to be thankful for? I've got hands. I've got a mind. I can breathe. I'm alive. I can see you. You could just look at your hand and come up with 100 reasons to be thankful just with one hand. And I think this is a really important exercise. I would highly recommend everyone take time to do it. Take some time to just practice thankfulness. And whether you're a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or even an atheist, I think you'll find the powerful effects of practicing thankfulness will be very rewarding. And I wish I had a picture of Ann Miller so we could show you that while I dedicate a song to Ann Miller. And this is what you would see if you ever go to a free place and you see a bunch of beautiful people worshiping God, thanking God. And this was captured at a recording in Dallas. And the song is called I Thank God, written by Jesse Klein, Margaret George, Dan Thibault, Aaron Moses, and Chuck Butler. Friends, I thank you. I thank God for you. Please click the like button, choose a paid subscription if you can, share the wins of the weeks with others. I look forward to your comments in the comments section, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful week. Oh, and you'll have to click the link to open that video just because of YouTube rules. So please click the link and enjoy the uplifting experience you could get in a good old down-earth, non-denominational Christian church pretty much anywhere. God bless.